Hey 1B, welcome to our afternoon read aloud. And since it's springtime, the book I chose today is none other than Charlotte's Web, an all-time classic written by E.B. White. This story was read to me when I was little, and matter of fact, I read it when I got a little bit older, and I read it every year during the springtime. This is a great story about friendship. All right? Here's what I want you to do today. As I read chapter number 1, I want you to listen to how E.B. White, the author, describes the setting of the story. And what I'm asking you to listen for is, I want you to sometimes even close your eyes and try to imagine yourself in the shoes of the main character. This girl's name is Fern, and in the beginning of this book, she's going to have some pretty strong emotions about something. And I want you to pretend, even if you're not a girl, it's okay boys, you can do this too. I want you to pretend if that was you, how would you feel? And as the author is writing this chapter, listen to how she describes the setting. What's happening around in the world, in her house, outside. The author even goes as far as describing of how it smells and how it sounds and things like that. She does a really good job of painting a picture of the setting. So when you close your eyes, you can almost imagine yourself in the story. So this is chapter 1 of Charlotte's Web. Chapter number 1 is called Before Breakfast. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. "Out to the hog house," replied Mrs. Arable. "Some pigs were born last night." "I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8 years old. "Well," said her mother, "one of the pigs is a runt. It's a very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything, so your father has decided to do away with it." "Do away with it?" shrieked Fern. "You mean kill it? Just because it's smaller than the others?" Mrs. Arable put a pitcher of cream on the table. "Don't yell, Fern," she said. "Your father is right. The pig would probably die anyway." Fern pushed her chair out of the way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet and the earth smelled of springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. Just imagine you running through wet grass, how your feet would feel. "Please don't kill it," she sobbed. "It's unfair." Mr. Arable stopped walking. "Fern," he said gently, "you will have to learn to control yourself." "Control myself?" yelled Fern. "This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself?" Tears ran down her cheeks as she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. "Fern," said Mr. Arable, "I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along." "But it's unfair," cried Fern. "The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been born very small at birth, would you have killed me?" Mr. Arable smiled. "Certainly not," he said, looking down at his daughter with love. "But this is different. A little girl is one thing. A little runty pig is another." "I see no difference," replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. "This is the most terrible case of injustice I ever heard of." There's a good word, a good vocabulary word there, injustice. What that means is something that is very unfair. Like the pig had nothing to do with being born small, and now it could die because of it. That is injustice. A weird look came over Mr. Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. "All right," he said, "you go back to the house and I will bring the runt when I come in. I will let you start it on a bottle, like a baby. Then you'll see what trouble a pig can be." When Mr. Arable returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled of coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. Close your eyes and try to visualize that. You just wake up in the morning and the house smells of coffee and bacon. Put it on her chair, said Mrs. Arable. Mr. Arable set the carton down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink and washed his hands and dried them on the roller towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying. As she approached her chair, the carton wobbled, and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father. Then she lifted the lid of the carton. There inside, looking up at her, was a newborn pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. "He's yours," said Mr. Arable, "saved from an untimely death. And may the good Lord forgive me for this foolishness." Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. "Oh," she whispered, "oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect." She closed the carton carefully. First, she kissed her father. Then she kissed her mother. Then she opened the lid again, lifted the pig out, and held it against her cheek. At this moment, her brother Avery came into the room. Avery was 10. He was heavily armed with an air rifle in one hand and a wooden dagger in the other. A dagger is another name for a sword. "What's that?" he demanded. "What's Fern got?" "She's got a guest for breakfast," said Mrs. Arable. "Wash your hands and face, Avery." "Let's see it," said Avery, setting his gun down. "You call that miserable thing a pig? That's a fine specimen of a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat." "Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery," said her mother. "The school bus will be here in a half an hour." "Can I have a pig too, Pop?" asked Avery. "No, I only distribute pigs to early risers," said Mr. Arable. "Fern was up at daylight trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she now has a pig. A small one, to be sure, but nevertheless a pig. It just shows what can happen if a person gets out of bed promptly. Let's eat." But Fern couldn't eat until her pig had had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arable found a baby's nursing bottle and a rubber nipple. She poured warm milk into the bottle, fitted the nipple over the top, and handed it to Fern. "Give him his breakfast," she said. A minute later, Fern was seated on the floor in the corner of the kitchen with her infant between her knees, teaching it how to suck from a bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. I wonder if you could compare this picture to something else that it reminds you of. When I read that page and I see that picture, it reminds me of a human mother feeding its baby. And that's how Fern is treating the baby pig, just like a baby person. The school bus honked from the road. "Run!" commanded Mrs. Arable, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed his gun and another donut. The children ran out to the road and climbed onto the bus. Fern took no notice of others on the bus. She just sat and stared out the window, thinking what a blissful world it was and how lucky she was to have entire charge of a pig. By the time the bus reached school, Fern had named her pet, selecting the most beautiful name she could think of. "Its name is Wilbur," she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when the teacher said, "Fern, what's the capital of Pennsylvania?" "Wilbur," replied Fern dreamily. The pupils giggled. Fern blushed. And that's the end of chapter 1. Were you able to maybe close your eyes and visualize in your brain, put yourself in the story on that early springtime morning when that baby pig was born and Fern had found out that her dad was going to kill it? How did you feel about it? Did you feel the same way that Fern did? Did you think it was unfair or unjust like she did? Well, her actions proved that she saved the pig's life because her dad didn't kill it. He gave it to her, but now she has to raise it, and that could be more trouble than what it's worth. Tomorrow we will read chapter 2, and it's called Wilbur. We're going to learn more about Wilbur the pig. All right, until tomorrow.